In spring 1942, there were 250 Americans of Japanese ancestry enrolled at 6 California State University campuses. On February 19, 1942, Executive Order 9066 and the military orders that followed forever changed the course of their lives. These young adults, the Nisei, born and raised in California, full of promise and hope, were forced to leave their communities and drop out of college. Some moved to an inland state, but most were rounded up and sent to live in an American-style concentration camp in the most desolate parts of the country. Manzanar, Tule Lake, Topaz, Heart Mountain, Rower, Gila River, Poston, Amachi, Jerome, Minidoka became their new home for the duration of World War II. After their release, many Nisei never had the chance to return to college. Their dreams of a college education shattered. In the spring of 2010, the CSU located 125 of these former students and presented them with special honorary bachelor's degrees at commencement ceremonies at 6 campuses. These degrees, although long overdue, brought tears, smiles, and a sense of closure for the former CSU students and the community. The barbed wire fences that imprisoned them and tore them away from their aspirations have now been replaced by the dignity of their very special honorary bachelor's degrees.
Please bear with me the next few minutes if I get a little emotional, because today we're honoring some incredible, inspiring individuals. They deserve our utmost respect and admiration. I can think of no better way to participate in this commencement season than to be here today, honoring former San Jose State University students, as well as several other students who attended CSU campuses. These individuals succeeded despite having their lives uprooted and their dreams disrupted as a result of dramatic events that affected them through no fault of their own. Though long overdue, these honorary degrees represent a righting of a past wrong.
My father's born in California, my grandfather's born in Hawaii, and on my mother's side, they're from the Sacramento Elk Grove area. And they met in camp during World War II. It was one of those good news, bad news. The bad news was that they were in camp. The good news was that had they not met, I wouldn't be here. So those are the kinds of ways of history. And one of the touchstones in our community is the camps that Japanese were incarcerated in during World War II. It's always a reference point. Eventually, during the conversation with new friends or strangers, even if they're Japanese American, somewhere along the way the question comes up, were you in camp? If you were in camp, what camp? If you weren't in camp, what camp was your family in? And that becomes just a touchstone for our community. And in the beginning, very few in our community talked about it after the war. It was as described by a second-generation Nisei activist named Edison Nuno. He described it as like being a rape victim, where you don't want to talk about it, but it has a tremendous impact on your life.
The conferral of these honorary degrees is a wonderful idea. It is well-deserved and symbolically very important. As someone who experienced internment myself, this ceremony has a lot of personal meaning for me as well as you, the honorees. However, I was only 6 years old at the time, went through 1st through 3rd grades in the Minidoka, Idaho internment camp. If I had been old enough to be in college like all of you honorees, I can only imagine how you must have felt to be forced to terminate your higher education under these traumatic and demoralizing circumstances. Your average age at the time of internment was about 19, and almost all of you were American-born citizens. I'm sure your education in American schools imbued you with a deep belief in such American ideals as democracy, freedom, and liberty, making you among the most loyal and patriotic citizens of this nation.
Now we will hear from Yoshihito Uchida and the son of Fumi Yokoyama, degree recipients from San Jose State University.
My name is Yoshihiro Uchida, and I'm in San Jose, California. I was born in Calexico, California. I lived there for a very short period, about 6 months, and then I went back to Japan, and right at the 1924, when they had passed the Oriental Exclusion Act, my parents brought me back, my brother and myself back. They left my sister and my older brother in Japan to be educated by the grandmother. First I moved to a place called Uplands, which is by Ontario in Southern California, and down into Garden Grove, Westminster, in this Orange County area.
I'm Dana Ono, and we're coming to you from Lexington, Massachusetts, which is outside of Boston. Unfortunately, my mother passed away in late October and didn't know anything about this program, and unfortunately received this degree posthumously. My mother attended CSU. She attended San Jose State. She grew up in Sunnyvale, California, which San Jose State I think was the closest geographically to where she grew up. Sunnyvale, which is now part of just high-tech America, Silicon Valley, was country. And she grew up literally in quince fields, and it was all farmland. It was a very idyllic lifestyle, very rural. My father's side, which I know a little bit better because of just the situation that my family went in, he grew up in a community called Terminal Island in California, which is off of San Pedro. And my grandfather had a commercial tuna fishing operation.
We were farmers, and we first raised chili pepper. Didn't do too well in that, so we switched to tomatoes and celery and things like that. No, my parents didn't have much of an education, but education to my parents were very important. I think the Niseis were very fortunate that their parents forced them to go to graduate from high school and go to college.
Education was probably the #1 priority in the family, but always for the kids, so it's always my generation.
When they came to the United States, they found that they had a very difficult time because of they didn't have the education and they couldn't learn English, and because of that they were treated quite miserably.
Part of that generation, the Nisei generation in general, had to do with the fact that since many of them couldn't finish and were in fact, their careers were cut short because of that, or certainly stymied, they knew that that was the ticket to do bigger, better things with it.
They said, well, if you're going to become anything in the United States or accomplish anything in the United States, you have to have an education. He said, don't be like us, uneducated farmers.
In both my mother's and father's cases, since they were matriculated only a very short period of time in college, I don't know of any major that was ever declared by either of them. And I would assume they didn't at the time. I think my father was only in college for under a year, and my mother, I think, was a year or so.
The interesting thing for me was the experience of those that were going to the college, the university, the state colleges that existed, and community colleges at the time. Their sense of their future was the proverbial rug was pulled out from underneath them. So it was about finishing up, tying together loose ends, putting closure to, and that was the motivation for doing AB 37. And another aspect of it that I found really interesting, and I want to do more research on it, is the number of women that went to college. I mean, we're talking about the 1940s, And there was an extraordinary number of women, Japanese American women, that were going to college.
In 1940, my friend of mine named Tashima, who lived about half a mile away from me, said, Yosh, what are you going to do now that you're out of school? And I said, oh, I don't know. He said, well, why don't we go to school? I said, where? San Jose State. And I said, San Jose State? I never heard of it. He says, well, it's the teacher's college. Or he says, it used to be a teacher's college. Oh, yeah? He says, well, how big? He says, oh, it's about 3,000. Oh, that sounds very interesting. Why not? He said, I think my dad and mother want me to go to UCLA and he said, or Cal. And she said, well, I don't want to go to Cal because my brother's going to Cal. I said, okay, let's go to San Jose then. The apartment I had, there was no shower. On Fridays after school class, we got out about 5 o'clock. We would, my roommate and I, we would shoot baskets and get warmed up and get a sweat up, and we'd go in and take a shower. And I saw one fellow warming up for wrestling, and he said, hey, you know anything about wrestling? I said, no. Do you know anything about jiu-jitsu? I said, no. How about judo? No. He says, come on, I'll teach you. So I said, oh, okay. So I dropped my basketball there, and I went on the mat there, and he tried to throw me, and I knew he couldn't throw me, but what the heck. So I picked him up, and I threw him. Two great big guys came up and said, do you know what you did? Oh, no. Do you know who that guy is? No. He says, he is the Navy champion. I said, wow, he was good. I guess he's good. He says, good? You beat the Navy champion there. He says, you had any wrestling experience? I said, no. You had any experience in judo or jiu-jitsu? I said, no. But I had, I lied because I did do judo in Orange County, and I had done judo about 10 years there, so I knew a little bit about it.
You know, everybody was on high alert because of the bombings in Pearl Harbor, and at that point, all Japanese Americans were considered spies. She said that she would walk down the street and she would see the signs in shops saying no Japs allowed, and then seeing Chinese Americans walking around with badges saying, I am Chinese American. And they were cloistered geographically in California, basically, that it was easy to move them off the coast.
The war started in December 7th. There was a freeze on our traveling, so we could not travel more than 1 or 2 miles from wherever you lived. I was drafted in February. I quit. I came back to school, and then I got my draft notice, so I went. They were moved in. They were taken away in May of 1942. I thought there was a big mistake, and that they would do something like that to U.S. citizens.
In the case of my mother, she was interred at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, and the only stories I recall from her were being rounded up and spending the first couple of weeks in horse stalls with straw at Santa Anita Racetrack before being shipped to Wyoming. Incredibly desolate place. I've been there, fly fishing in that area, and it's a very desolate locale. In the case of my father, he remained in California. He was at probably the largest internment camp. He was at Manzanar in California. And again, he had a very different experiences, but they had 24 or 48 hours to evacuate and pick up whatever they could and leave for Manzanar. They had two tuna clippers, which were confiscated by the government, and they were made into minesweepers during the war and blown up in the South Pacific. Somebody had told me that my grandfather's business was worth $250,000 in 1942 dollars. And so while there's no bitterness in the Nisei, my parents' generation, my generation, the Sansei, feel much more that our legacy was gone. And so we're more bitter than they were. They're feeling, and it's not alone, I think all Niseis feel that we came here with nothing, we can build it up again. You know, don't make waves, you know, we'll just build it again. Hard work will get us back there again.
It is certainly understandable that many Nisei would not want to share such pain with their children, to want to protect them, to shield them from such painful experiences, so they could grow up seeing the promise and hope of America rather than its injustices and cruelties. But it should also be noted that even during the darkest days of our incarceration, there were glimmers of hope.
It was never pity me. What a hardship living in a horse stall for 2 weeks and then literally living in a bungalow with the entire family in one room or what have you.
And I was end of February, I was inducted into the military. We stayed at Fort MacArthur till we got shipped out. I went to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and while I was going through Cheyenne, Wyoming, this personnel officer looked at what I was doing and says, "What have you been doing?" I said, "I've been doing this. He said, "Well, according to this, you've been you're a chemistry major, and you've got a lot of chemistry here, you know, all this." And so, you know, how would you like to go into do some work in the medical laboratory? I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Sure, I'd be glad to." So I got to go into the medical laboratory. They personally took me under their wings, and they would tell me about immunology, and I said, "Immunology?" I felt that it was my duty to go when I'm called by the country.
In terms of life in the camps for both my mother and father, and you have to remember that they were 17, 18 years of age at this point in time, and so their life behind barbed wire, and I just remember them saying, at least in my mother's case, it was fun. And I would look at her and say, "What do you mean? How could it be fun when your basic citizenship has been stripped from you, to be behind barbed wire?" And she said, "Well, you have to remember, we were kids, and we were all together because it was like one big block party, and we were making oleo and camouflage netting for the war effort, and it was like a big party at the time." Once they were in the camps, it was all communal dining, and they set up their own organizations. So they set up their own baseball teams, they set up their own schools. Caucasian teachers would come in to teach, and so they had their own community. So it was, if you could say anything about the Nisei, they're very resourceful in that they lived within their means.
End of 1945, we got discharged, and I came home to San Jose. Found out that they didn't want to rent to Japanese, and I was still in the uniform. I'd just been discharged, and it was just you start to boil.
I don't think there was ever any notion of my folks going back to college after the war. Since they had lost everything during the war, both sides had lost everything, they had to go to work immediately. She ended up in Chicago and then migrated to South Jersey. Now, people might ask, why South Jersey? What's in South Jersey that everybody came to South Jersey? Well, it turned out that there was an entrepreneur by the name of Charles Seabrook. And Charles Seabrook, many people might know him as one of the inventors of flash frozen vegetable produce, bird's eye, okay? And so it's all, southern New Jersey is just fields. I mean, it's just farmland. And so what he did was he hired the Japanese Americans and the Eastern Europeans that had been displaced during the war to work the fields in South Jersey. And that's where my mother ended up and met my father there. And so they were married in 1950 in southern New Jersey.
They asked me to teach judo again to the police students, but these guys that came back were very tough. So one of them came up to me and says, now, what are you going to teach us? I said, judo. You can't teach us judo. He says, why not? He says, because guys like you, we used to bayonet just for practice in the morning. He says, you're not going to teach us any judo. I said, well, I have that's my job, teaching. It was bad for the East States because everything they owned was wiped out. But for many of the Niseis, it made us, forced us, I think, to work harder to get to someplace if they got the opportunity to do it.
They didn't burden us with, you guys have to do well in education because we got screwed. Okay, we couldn't finish, and so we're putting all of our efforts into you guys. It was never an obligation on our part to do that. It was never pressure to do that if we had to.
The reason nobody knows too much about it because I think, like the East Side, they says, shikata ga nai, which meant it can't be helped, and they took it on the chin and kept moving forward. The Niseis, some have spoken out, but many have not.
I have an interesting situation with my kids because they are half Japanese and half German, Hungarian Jew. Okay, so as we said, we have both groups, both persecuted groups in our kids. So my wife's folks, mother's side, had gone through the Holocaust, and on that side of the fence. My mother clearly would have finished her bachelor's degree. She was a smart lady, very quiet, but it changed them because I think it forced them to grow up quickly. They didn't have the luxury like our kids do today of kind of going to school and because the job market's so bad, coming home and living on us still. They had to go out and earn a living for survival right away. It gutted probably 30 years of a lifestyle and gone. In 48 hours, it's gone, okay?
The awarding of these honorary degrees will hopefully help make up to a small degree for the involuntary disruption of their education and bring closure to this most unfortunate chapter in their lives. But I also believe the awarding of these honorary degrees is important for the symbolic significance of the message it sends to all Americans. It tells us that part of America's greatness is because it can own up to and make amends for its mistakes. Perhaps more importantly, it also tells us that we cannot take our democracy for granted, but that all Americans have a responsibility and stake in preserving our freedoms and liberties for all groups in our society, regardless of race, religion, or nationality.
Well, I was very honored that the university or the Board of Trustees have recognized that so many of us went to the university at that time trying to become better citizens and better educated. And I think from the education standpoint, it was really that the trustees, the universities have recognized the achievements of the Japanese Americans as a whole.
For my mother, as I said, it's too bad she didn't know about it, and I couldn't tell her, that this thing is coming. But for my father, it was fabulous. I mean, that he could get this, and he proudly talks about it. And from a spirit side, I mean, unbelievable. I mean, it's really been a great thing. At least one way to seal the wound of that period.
For me, going to college is not just a possibility. It is an expectation. I know, however, that 70 years ago, the opportunity to go to college was taken away from the Nisei. They had done nothing wrong except for being born Japanese in America. Because of the Nisei's courage, loyalty, and hard work, Japanese Americans are recognized today as loyal Americans. Because of their sacrifices, I will be able to go to college. We must commit ourselves to never again letting liberty and justice be taken away from any American just because the color of their skin is different. Okage-sama de. Because of you, I am. Thank you for what you have done for Japanese Americans, for all Americans, and for me. You are like a handprint on my heart. I will not forget what the Nisei have done. Congratulations on receiving your diploma.
I believe we must remind ourselves of the immortal words of Pastor Martin Niemöller, who, in recounting his experiences in Nazi Germany, wrote, and I quote, "In Germany they came for the communists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics. I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak up for me."
I think that's the point. It's not just a history lesson. It's not nostalgia. It's not going back. What it is really going forward. It's a teaching moment to talk about the importance of the Constitution, the importance of people's rights. And no matter the environment, no matter the ethnicity, no matter the gender preference, whatever, people have these rights at all times as Americans. And you can't take them lightly. You can't, just because the situation may be very negative around a war experience or terrorism or whatever the case may be, you can't use that as a reason to trample people's constitutional rights. And as an individual, you have a right of due process, and as an American, you have the protections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And those things were violated in this chapter of history. And oftentimes we go up to the edge. Sometimes individuals step over and they violate these rights, and we have to pull people back. And I think it also showed the resiliency of the government and their ability to finally redress and apologize for the experience and make corrections in our democracy.
In concluding, let me just say to our Nisei honorees that in accepting these honorary degrees, you are speaking up not only for Japanese Americans, but for all Americans. Your experiences should be both a warning and an inspiration to all Americans. It warns us that the U.S. Constitution alone will not protect our liberties and freedoms, that it's just a piece of paper which is given life only by the efforts and vigilance of all of us to maintain our democratic principles and ideals for all of our citizens. And it inspires us because after the internment, you did not allow yourself to be consumed in bitterness, but through hard work and determination, you rebuilt your lives and helped ensure a brighter future for upcoming generations of Japanese Americans. So, on behalf of all Japanese Americans, and dare I say for all Americans, I want to express our gratitude to the honorees and the entire Nisei generation for their fortitude, resilience, and sacrifice that has left us with such an enduring and important legacy.
You've heard the never-before-told stories, that are part of the history of the California State University and the country. We all must make sure that actions like this never happen to any group of people anywhere again.